Alright, welcome back. Another little bonus episode. Much like with Sonic 1, I got to the end of the game, I bit the dust, and as proof that I am replaying all the way through it, and as you will see, all the way through it twice because of something that happened, because of doing it legit, just like what would happen on the cartridge way back when, I'll do it again. And yes, not playing on my actual cartridges. While I do have the cartridges for these games, for that matter, I have a 32X and the cartridges for that, brand new, and still in the boxes, from back in the 90s, because I was a sucker and I bought that piece of hot garbage. But that's a different point entirely. So, I have the cartridges, I have some collection discs with them on it as well. I also have the Steam Sega collection to top it off, so I've got about 3 or 4 copies of Sonic 2 alone, and basically most Sonic games that came out at the time. So, while I am emulating, it is a matter of ease of use. When I emulate, it's just easier for me to just pick up and play games because I get them all set up at once. Whereas setting up 20 different consoles, and I mean 20 different consoles, the various power requirements for them, having that many outlets needed, the signal lamps, the splitters needed to get it to a CRT, the space to put a CRT. My only CRT is RF only, which, if you don't know what that looks like, just take the game and just make it look like complete butt. RF was not very good to look at. And then the capture device I have does not take RF. It doesn't even take composite, so I'd have to get it somehow scaled up to component at the very least. And at that point, it's just going through so many different components. It's just so much easier to do it this way. So I have the games I'm emulating, but you know, I am very upfront. I emulate. I really like emulating. It's actually pretty fun. It's a little bit of a hobby in and of itself to get things working right. Now, in terms of how that goes, there's a few different tiers of emulation. I didn't really talk about that in the past. You can run things on the actual hardware and emulate the software itself, at which point no one can tell the difference because effectively it's the same output coming out of the console in the long run. That I don't do, because that was... it gets a little weird, plus same problem there, it's just a humongous setup to do. You also have hardware level emulation. Every console that's ever been around is pretty much made out of off-the-shelf components, to a degree. And today you can still get mini chips, all the way back to the Commodore 64, that function very similar to the ones that existed back then. So there's a few projects out there that actually look to recreate basically like all-in-one consoles that cram them all together with enough audio chips, enough CPUs, and enough processors that are close enough to the real deal that if you play a game off of it, as far as the TV output looks, you'd never really know the difference. And that's actually really cool to kind of keep that CRT experience going. Well, I find a CRT filter to be good enough for my tastes. I can see why some people would still want to go to that, because it does look better. I mean, it's the best way to experience those games. If you have the time, if you have the effort, sure. For me, I picked this as my happy medium in the world of software emulation. I do it a somewhat more complex way, but, you know, you get kind of a close enough feel, and that's where I like to live with my games. Now, there's also sort of the more simple level software emulation. This is what you'll find on the Steam Sega collection. Now, if you're going to play these games, that's honestly the way I would recommend it. Because while they don't have a fancy CRT filter, you can actually use things like Reshade to do that on any game. So you can actually do that with the Steam copies. I found that out much later. I might have done that if I had known. But they also come with their own little overlay, which is a lot less hardware taxing, so it works on more computers. So you'll be more likely to run that if you maybe don't have a powerful computer. It actually will work. And it's a much easier way to do it. Hey, you just hit play and plug in your controller and you're good to go, or power it on if it's wireless like the one I use. Oh yes, and I know people think, oh, what about the latency? It's really not bad. I've barely noticed. I played through Dark Souls, the Sonic games, and a few others with the Bluetooth controller. They're fine. But anyway, you kind of get those tiers of these different things that you can use for your emulation. They get kind of close enough. And truth be told, I really wish more companies would do it the way Sega has in terms of those collections. Because a collection disc, like for instance on PlayStation 2 and GameCube, those are usually ports, where they've recreated the game's code in the language of the modern system. And that sounds like, well, that would run really well, but it never runs the same. Those are different games. Oftentimes physics will be a little off. People can actually see this in the original Mario Brothers for the Nintendo. It came out on the All-Star cartridge on the Super Nintendo. And while I would actually play that version, it's really good. They updated the graphics, it looks a lot nicer. The physics are actually a little different. Not by a lot, I mean, it's fine, but they are a little bit different. And that was on machines that weren't that far apart in age. You start scaling that up over the years, and the effects can get fairly drastic over time. So emulation is usually one of the best bets, and I wish more companies would embrace that. Sony tried to with the PlayStation 1 Classic, which I believe I mentioned before, but they did some weird choices there of combining like NTSC releases from like the US with European releases that run at different frame rates, so it's kind of odd that they chose to do it that way. They used a good emulator, but they really didn't do anything with it to adjust it to work better with the hardware they gave. The hardware they gave was kind of underpowered for what it was doing and not optimized enough to take full advantage of it. So it's a little less than the experience of the original, which is a real shame because it was very nice to have a PS1 that could play with an HDMI output that easily. It's a little bit of a shame that it wasn't quite good enough. I really think one of these companies should really make one of their mini consoles, give it a downloadable store, a spot to plug in like an SD card for some reasonable memory for it for storage. That would be fantastic. I really think they could capitalize on that, and us as gamers, we could actually get those games in an easy-to-use way. Konami kind of did this with the Castlevania collection. It's absolutely fantastic. It runs really well. It's got the little CRT scanline option. Yeah, it's not quite as good as what I use, but no, it's not bad. And it's so much easier just to be able to pick up and play. I feel like companies are really missing out on this. You know, emulation got kind of demonized early on, particularly by Nintendo, but it really exists, and these kind of games show it as a way to truly sell the back catalog. I mean, if you could pick up your old favorite games for a couple of dollars to digitize your collection, because maybe you're moving to a different country, maybe you move around a lot, and you can't really haul that stuff with you. You're like me and you just don't have the space for it, so it's all boxed up in storage half the time. Emulation comes in great because you don't have to port every single game. Pay staff to redo the code for every game to only end up, partway accurate in the whole deal. Instead, you get an emulator, you make one, or more likely, you go to one of the people who make an open source one and say, hey, can we credit you and just use your emulator? And even better yet, if they contribute some code back to it to help make it a little more accurate, then they can resell their entire back catalog at cheap prices for us, and we actually get to play those games again all in one place. That's awesome. More companies should really consider doing that. It's a great way for them to make money on low effort, and a great way for us to be able to get back to those games that maybe we just don't have access to or an easy way to play anymore. And people will often say, well, yeah, but people downloading ROMs, why would they bother to pay for it? Well, I think there's a very easy explanation for that one. It's easier. I mean, that's the whole thing. Steam proved it years ago. You can eliminate people downloading stuff if you make things a decent price and you make it easier to do. Nobody's gonna go pirate Portal because you could get it for free half the time, or you can get it for $3 on a sale, and the game's not that expensive to begin with. You don't want to risk giving your computer AIDS over something you can obtain easily, have with you, have cloud saves, and just have an easier time playing for a couple of bucks. And that same applies to emulation. I've got the Castlevania collection. I'm planning on playing through that because it's awesome, and they did a great job on it. And they did this in such a great way that there's just no reason not to. They give you a lot of extras with it, you know, including the Japanese versions, which turned out to be really well. There's, I recommend it to people, and if companies did this more, it'd be fantastic. More people should follow in the footsteps of Sega with their Sega collection. And it's got nice little bonuses on that in the Steam version. I'm not playing the Steam version because it's just the emulator's a little more primitive than what I like, but it's a step in the right direction, and I really hope to see more of that in the future. You know, and that's really where it comes in. Why would people buy it over downloading? Just the ease of use. For Sonic 2 here, I spent a considerable amount of time trying to get the reset trick to work. So for Sonic 2, when you reset the game, you don't reset the Emerald data. So you can farm the first level for multiple Chaos Emerald again and again and again to get Supersonic from stage 1 on. And I wanted to play it a different way because I just played through the whole game, died at the end. I didn't want to replay it the whole way again the same way. So that was my way of kind of keeping it a little more entertaining. Now the shame for that, in the long run, comes into the fact that that's not easy to emulate resetting a console. An emulator just thinks, oh, why don't I just exit and go back in? So that actually took quite a bit of setup to get that functionality to work properly. There were a bunch of settings to go through. Now if a company is releasing this in such a way, and the Steam version, I haven't tested it, but perhaps it might be that way. In fact, it's actually pretty lovingly crafted, so it very well may have that functionality right from the start. That's easier, and that is a selling point to people. Easy and lazy. That is your best bet against people just downloading stuff and actually paying to play again. And here's where emulation is accurate. Here's a bug that caused me to have to repeat the game. I got stuck. Timer wasn't going down, so I wasn't going to die because I beat the stage, but it wasn't progressing to the next stage. I skipped over it for the purposes of this video, but I actually had to play through the whole thing a second time because it glitched. And that is a glitch that is actually in the game. It's uncommon, but I do remember having that happen to a kid, as a kid, and oh man, that'll piss you right off. But it actually wasn't that bad. I mean, it's pretty quick to get through these games, but when you're a kid, that's upsetting. But it's just funny that it just so happened here. It's a great example of, you know, emulation accuracy right down little faults. But you kind of want that, you know, as an enthusiast. You want to have it close to what it was, if not 100% what it was. And that brings me to the point of save states. I had no save state to go back to because I don't really use them. You know, keeping it to the original experience, I replay the game if I lose. I do use them just in upfront clarity. I do actually use save states if it's a situation where I'm picking up the game the next day. In much the same way as a kid, I would have just left the console powered on. It's the same effect. I don't redo it from the save state. If I lose, I delete it, and I continue on, which is what happened here. I didn't have one to continue back to, so, you know, back to the beginning again. The thing about that, though, I just wanted to be upfront and clear on that. Don't use cheat engines for it either. There is one game I'm considering playing that I might. I used to really like Armored Core, and there's a secret in that game. If you lose a whole bunch, you unlock a bunch of extra powers, which make the game way more fun. But it takes hours to do. Now, on my original PlayStation, I actually have a saved memory card that has a game save right after doing all of that. So I didn't have to redo that every time I wanted to play the game. Don't have a way of getting that to my computer. It upscales way better on my computer than onto the modern TV. So if I end up going to play Armored Core, you know, something like a cheat engine just to save me the hours of just losing the game to unlock something that otherwise is just a matter of time saving, yeah, I'll do something like that. But I will always disclose that kind of thing. You know, I'm not going to just do that and not actually say what I did. So for me, save states are just a matter of it's being used as the way I would have left the console turned on or getting around something that's just dumb, like having to die a million times in Armored Core and waste 4 hours of my life or something that I can just flip on. In fact, a lot of those effects became standard in the game later on. The double energy one in particular, I can remember, that actually just became the default energy amount because the game is so much better with it. So in later sequels, they skip past that one. It's just default afterward. But I'll always kind of be upfront with those things. The same way I'm upfront with my emulation. I make no secret to hide it, and I own the actual games, just to be upfront and clear with people. That is why. And I really recommend it to others. I recommend it to others. I hope companies pick up on it more. It's just a great way to release those back catalogs, and they could honestly, with the rights to the games, they could really cash in on that. Some of the games that didn't sell well back in the day because there was just no advertising for them. Back then, the only way you learned about a game was from a friend, or you saw it in the store and it had cool cover art. There's great games with terrible cover art, and the entirety of the Mega Man series is like that. I don't know what they were thinking in the English, Western version. They are terrible looking. But amazing games, but word of mouth, people would tell you about them. But sometimes you miss out on games because of that. No one you knew of the game or said anything about the game. You got magazines sometimes back then, but good luck with that. It was a lot of paid spots, or a lot of companies shilling their own games. You never knew what was actually good. Maybe you got a good one, maybe you got a terrible one. Maybe you missed out on something great because the advertisement for it was terrible. Look what happened to Earthbound. Try getting a copy of that these days. They sell for a small fortune because nobody bought the game. It was a perfectly fine game, but the advertising for it was terrible. And a bunch of magazines just didn't get it, so they review bombed the thing because they only had 20 minutes to play it to do a review. So you knew nobody with it. It didn't sell a lot of copies, and you kind of lose out on that. Whereas these days, it's a really easy way to resell their games on any and every platform as soon as they get the emulators working or borrow the code. Instant market. So I really see it as an opportunity for everybody in that. Oh, and here's where we're almost back to the end stage. And for some reason I was thinking, okay, if I don't win as Supersonic, maybe I get to keep the rings into the next stage. Didn't realize it's a complete stage transition, and you never keep your rings into the next stage. But I was truly hoping that the last boss was not done on 0 rings. So I wanted to test the hypothesis, so I died and made this whole last boss fight a lot harder than it needed to be. I died a few times because of it. So I'm going to be down to just a couple tries on the last boss yet again, because of doing this like a dum-dum. Because it does not matter how well you do at this one, you go into the next boss with zip. And I get why they tried to do that, because if you have rings, the boss fight becomes kind of trivial because you can just keep picking your rings back up. And that's designed for the speeding through the level aspect of Sonic, not really for the boss fight part. So they wanted the final boss to be hard, and I kind of get that, but at the same time, it's 2 boss fights back to back, and you start with nothing. So anyway, we're almost back up to where we were, so I'm going to catch you guys in the next one for the final part of this. Until then.